Let everything slow down now. Let your breathing find the rhythm of something older than thought. Tonight we go to the sea. Not the dramatic sea of storms. The sea in the long blue evening. The sea that holds the last light after the sun has gone. The sea that has been doing what it does since before any story was told about it. There is a particular sound that the sea makes when everything else is quiet. Not the crashing of waves against stone. That is the sea when it is saying something specific. But the quieter sound. The sound when the water is at rest and moving at the same time. The small lapping at the edge of the harbor. The gentle push and pull of the water under the dock. The almost silent movement of a protected bay where the swell has been reduced to a memory of itself by the time it arrives at the shore. This sound is ancient. It was there before the Norse people gave it a name. Before they built their longships and pushed them out onto the open water. Before they told their first story about the sea. It was there, simply doing what it does. Moving, receiving, giving back whatever came to it. The Norse people, who built their lives at the edge of the sea, understood something about this sound. They understood that it was the voice of something that did not need them. Something that had been there before them and would be there after them. Something that they could work with but could not own. And they were comforted by this. Because the thing that does not need you also cannot be disappointed by you. It accepts what comes with the specific, impersonal generosity of something that has decided, in its deep nature, to receive. The Norse people called the god of this quality Njörðr. And this is his story. In the beginning of Njörðr's story, before Asgard and the Asir, before the great events that would move him from one tradition to another, there was the sea. Not the sea as a place. The sea as a force. The Norse cosmos understood the sea as one of the oldest things, connected to the primordial waters that were there before the world was shaped. The deep, salt, ancient water that remembered what it was like before anything moved across it. Njörðr was the being who held this force, who was, in some sense, the consciousness of the sea's generosity. The reason why the sea gave fish. The reason why the wind came from the right direction on a morning when it was needed. The reason why a ship that had been long at sea found its way home. He came from the Vanir. Like his children Freyr and Freya after him, he was part of the older tradition. The tradition that understood the world from the inside of its processes rather than from above them. The Vanir did not command the sea. They were the sea in the specific sense that the deepest understanding of a thing is the understanding that comes from being part of it. The Vanir were ancient. Old in the specific way that traditions rooted in the natural world are old. Not the oldness of dusty libraries or accumulated texts, but the oldness of things that have been known in the body for as long as bodies have been here. The fisherman who knows the sea without needing to read about it. The farmer who knows the soil without needing to analyze it. The shepherd who knows the mountain without needing a map. This knowledge, bodily, transmitted, living, was the Vanir's knowledge. They knew the sea the way you know a language you grew up speaking. Not by learning it, by being in it. Njörðr was the fullest expression of this in the Vanir tradition. He was not merely connected to the sea. He was the understanding of the sea in the form of a being who could be known and approached and asked. The fisherman who went to the water in the morning and felt something in the specific quality of the air, the direction of the wind, the color at the horizon, was using the same knowledge that Njörðr embodied. The knowledge of the sea as a living thing that communicates. That tells you, if you know how to listen, what it is going to do, what it is willing to give, and when it is asking to be left alone. The conflict between the Asir and the Vanir, between the wall-building, oath-keeping warrior gods of Asgard and the nature-deep, abundance-giving Vanir of Vanaheim, came and then passed. Not with a clean victory, with an exchange. An exchange of people, of the most valued members of each tradition. The Asir sent 2 to Vanaheim. The Vanir sent 3 to Asgard. Njörðr and his children Freyr and Freya. Consider what this means about who Njörðr was. The Vanir chose their most valuable to send. Not their most powerful in the warrior sense, but their most essential. The one who held the understanding of the sea. The one whose children would become two of the most beloved gods in the Norse cosmos. The Vanir understood that what Asgard needed, what the Asir tradition needed to be whole, was this: the connection to the natural world. The understanding of the sea and the wind and the soil. The knowledge that prosperity was not manufactured but received by those who had learned to work with what the world offered rather than against it. Njörðr came to Asgard, not as a defeat, as a gift. Asgard was magnificent. Njörðr arrived in a place of golden halls and broad meadows and the organized, directed energy of a tradition that understood itself in terms of structure and hierarchy and the specific virtues of the warrior code. He arrived with the sea still in him. The quality of the sea, its patience, its rhythm, its specific indifference to hurry, came with him. He moved through Asgard's halls with the ease of someone who knows that all places have their own quality and that meeting a place's quality is more useful than imposing your own. The gods received him well. Odin understood the value of what had come. Thor, who was straightforward in his appreciations, recognized in Njörðr a different kind of strength from his own, the strength of tides, of deep water, of the force that shapes coastlines over centuries without any individual moment of dramatic action. The others recognized in him the quality that the sea has for those who live beside it. The specific comfort of a force that is larger than you and is not hostile. Not neutral exactly, but not against you. Generous when approached correctly. And Njörðr began to be what he had always been, now in a new context. The one who sent the favorable wind. The one who stilled the waters when the boat was in danger. The one who filled the nets. At Asgard's edge, where the divine realm gave way to the approach of the sea, or where the sea was present in the specific way that the sea is present even when you cannot see it, in the smell of the air and the quality of the light, Njörðr built his hall. Nóatún. The name means something like the ship place, the enclosure of ships, the harbor of the divine. It was built to hear the sea, not facing inland toward the center of things, facing outward, facing the water. The hall was made of weathered wood, not the polished pale timber of Frigg's Fensalar or the golden timber of Odin's Valhalla, but the specific wood of a building that has been near the sea long enough that the sea has become part of it. Gray and silver where the salt air had worked into the grain. Smooth from the hands of those who had leaned against it over the long years. Warm in the way of things that have been warmed many times and hold the warmth. From Nóatún, the sound of the water was always present. Not loudly, not the drama of crashing surf. The specific sound of the protected harbor. The small, regular conversation that the water holds with the shore when the weather is calm. The sound of a buoy moving in the gentle swell. The particular creak of a moored boat as the tide moves it. The cry of a seabird in the distance. These sounds were the background of Nóatún. The music it was always playing for anyone who sat still enough to hear it. In Nóatún, there was a quality that the other halls of Asgard did not have. The quality of return. Every hall had its quality. Valhalla had the quality of the honored and prepared. Fensalar had the quality of the held and the kept. Folkvangur had the quality of the received. Nóatún had the quality of the returned. The feeling that you had been somewhere and come back. That the voyage was complete. That the dock was beneath your feet again and the familiar smell of the shore was in the air and everything you had left behind was still there, waiting, exactly as you had left it. This quality was what sailors felt when they finally came home. And Njörðr held this quality in his hall the way a harbor holds its water, simply by being what it was, simply by having the right shape to receive what came to it. He sat in Nóatún in the evenings and the sea was outside and the fire was inside and both of these things were simply what they were, neither one diminished by the other. The fire warm, the sea present, the sound of the water a kind of breathing that the hall had taken on as its own. To understand Njörðr fully, you must understand what the sea was for the Norse people. Not a background, not a view. The road. The Norse people understood the sea as their primary pathway. Where other cultures had roads through forests or across plains, the Norse people had the sea. Their roads were the fjords and the straits and the open water between the islands. Their highways were the long coastlines with their specific hazards and their specific gifts. The child who grew up in a Norse coastal settlement grew up learning the sea the way inland children learned the forest. Its moods, its seasons, the specific quality of the light on the water that told you whether the weather was stable or changing. The specific smell of the air that told you where the current was. The specific sound of the waves against particular rocks that told you where you were without needing to see. The sea was also, for the Norse people, the source of much of their food. The fish that came in the cold water. The seals that hauled out on the rocks in certain seasons. The seabirds whose eggs were taken from the cliffs in summer. The sea provided. Not always. Not in every season and every storm. But consistently enough over the long relationship between the Norse people and their particular sea, that the relationship was one of genuine partnership. The Norse people gave the sea their attention and their respect and their specific knowledge. And the sea gave them food and roads and the specific freedom of people who can travel by water. Njörðr was the divine expression of this partnership. The Norse sailor who put out in the morning prayed to Njörðr. Not in the formal, structured way of organized religious ceremony. In the direct, practical way of someone addressing a known and trusted presence. The way you ask a favor of someone you have dealt with before and have found reliable. Send me the wind I need. Keep the water calm. Let me see what I need to see. Bring me home. These were the prayers. Practical. Specific. Without ornamentation. The Norse people were not given to the flowery supplication of traditions that required elaborate forms. They spoke to their gods the way they spoke to each other. Directly, with the assumption that the one being spoken to was capable and would understand. Njörðr heard these prayers. Not as an abstraction, not as a god receiving the distilled essence of human need from a great distance. But the way you hear something when you are the thing being called. The sea was his. The wind was his. Every prayer that went out across the water from a Norse sailor went to the quality of thing that Njörðr was. And he answered, not always with the exact outcome asked for, but the way the sea answers when it is being itself in its most generous aspect, by providing the conditions for what was asked to be possible. The wind that came from the right quarter just as the morning fog lifted. The unexpected calm that allowed the crossing to be made. The visibility that cleared at exactly the right moment. These were his answers. The fisherman's relationship with the sea was different from the sailor's relationship. The sailor was in dialogue with the sea as a road. The fisherman was in dialogue with the sea as a larder. The sea held what they needed. Not always visibly. Not always in the same place. The fish moved. The season changed. The temperature of the water shifted in ways that moved the fish from one location to another. The fisherman who did this well for many years was the fisherman who had learned to read these shifts. Who understood what the cold current meant for where the fish were. Who knew which birds were the birds that followed the schools and what their presence in a particular part of the sky meant. Who could feel the quality of the water under the hull of the boat, its temperature, its density, its specific movement, and understand from those qualities where the fish would be. Njörðr was the knowledge beneath this knowledge. The fisherman who called on him was calling on the tradition of understanding that allowed the reading of the sea to happen at all. Not magic. The accumulated attentiveness of many generations, compressed into the specific intelligence of a being who was that attentiveness. The fishermen who came home with full nets had the quality of Njörðr's blessing not because something supernatural had happened to them, but because they had applied the right knowledge in the right way at the right time. And the right knowledge was Njörðr's knowledge. The sea's own understanding of itself, made available to those who paid enough attention. Before the great events in the middle of his story, before the marriage and the mountains and the long negotiation between different ways of loving the world, before all of that Njörðr had his children. Freyr and Freya, twins, born into the Vanir tradition, carrying their father's quality in different forms. Freyr was the abundance of the good year, the sunshine and the harvest and the specific quality of the summer that gives everything it has. Freya was the beauty in all things, the love that sees what is valuable wherever it looks, the magic that moves with the deep structure of fate. Both of them carried Njörðr's understanding of the world as something to be worked with rather than commanded. The sea does not command its fish. It creates the conditions in which fish exist. Njörðr does not command the wind. He is the understanding that allows the wind to be navigated. Freyr does not command the harvest. He creates the conditions in which the harvest is possible. Freya does not command love. She perceives the value that is already present in what she loves. The three of them, father and the twin children, were the Vanir sensibility in its fullest expression. The abundance of the sea, the abundance of the field, and the beauty that allows both to be recognized for what they are. Njörðr watched his children move into their roles with the quality of a father who has given his children what they needed and then had the wisdom to step back and let them become it. Not hovering, present, available. The way the sea is available, not intrusive, not demanding attention, but there. Always there. If you need it. The specific things Njörðr gave his children were not just his lineage or his tradition. He gave them his quality. The quality of the sea in its most generous aspect. The sea gives without keeping track. It does not remember the fish it gave last year and subtract that from what it gives this year. Every morning the fisherman goes out. The sea is what it is. Not diminished, not resentful, not calculating. Just there. Full of what it has. Ready to give what can be given. Freyr inherited this in the form of the harvest. The harvest that came back every year. That did not keep score. That gave what it gave as a function of the conditions, not as a reward for the virtue of the receiver. Freya inherited this in the form of her love, which the old stories remember as vast and unconditional. She did not love selectively. She loved everything that came to her with enough openness to be loved. Both forms of the inheritance were the same inheritance. The generosity of the one who gives not because the giving costs them nothing, but because giving is simply what they do, what they are. And then there was the marriage. Skaði came to Asgard with grief and a purpose. Her father Njörðr had been killed in a conflict with the gods. The old stories place this in the context of Loki's dealings and the complicated sequence of events that followed them. Skaði came to Asgard not to make war, but to seek what the Norse tradition allowed for: reparation, compensation. She came in her armor and her bow, with the specific dignity of someone who has suffered a real loss and is pursuing a real claim. The gods received her with the specific seriousness that the claim deserved. And a marriage was arranged as part of the settlement. Skaði could choose a husband from among the gods, but she could only see their feet. The gods stood behind a curtain and she would choose by the quality of the foot. She chose what she believed were the most beautiful feet, thinking they were Baldur's. They were Njörðr's. The old stories tell this without much lingering on Skaði's reaction to the discovery. What they preserve is what came after. The marriage. Two completely different beings, from two completely different worlds, finding themselves in the relationship and discovering what it actually was. Skaði was the mountains. This is not merely a metaphor. She was the giantess of the winter peaks, born to Jotunheim's heights, to the specific quality of the high places in deep cold. She hunted on skis across the frozen slopes. She knew the mountain the way Njörðr knew the sea, from the inside. The specific sound of snow underfoot at different temperatures. The quality of the air at altitude that was different from the air in the valleys below. The silence of the peaks, which was not the same as the silence of other places. The mountain silence was the silence of something immense that simply had no need to speak. Rimheimer, the hall of her inheritance in the high places, was cold and clear and surrounded by the sound of nothing except wind and, occasionally, the distant fall of snow from a laden branch. Nóatún was the sea, the gentle harbor, the lapping water, the seabirds, the smell of salt and fish and the tar on the boats, the constant movement of the water, the constant sound of it. These two worlds were not enemies. They were simply different. Beautifully, completely, incompatibly different. They tried. This is the part of the story that is sometimes overlooked in the focus on the incompatibility. They tried. The old stories give them a specific arrangement. 9 nights at Nóatún, then 9 nights at Rimheimer, moving between their worlds, each one inhabiting the other's home for the span of the arrangement. Njörðr went to the mountains. He brought with him the quality of the sea, the patience, the rhythm, the specific openness of someone for whom movement was natural. He arrived in Rimheimer and received it honestly. The cold was real. The silence was different from any silence he knew. The absence of the sea's voice was not simply quiet. It was the specific absence of something that had always been present. He tried to love what Skaði loved. He looked at the mountains with the genuine attempt to see what she saw in them. And he found, being an honest being, that he could see the beauty. The specific beauty of the high places. The particular quality of the light above the cloud line. The way the peaks caught the morning sun while the valleys were still in shadow. The grandeur of stone that had been stone for longer than any other measurement mattered. He could see all of this. And he missed the sea. Not abstractly, with the specific longing of someone who is far from home. Njörðr speaks about his time in the mountains. The old sources preserve something like what he said. He did not love the sound of the wolves in the peaks. He missed the seabirds, specifically the cry of the seabird. This is one of those small, precise details that makes the old myths feel suddenly real. Not a complaint about the cold or the isolation or the beauty being wrong. A specific, particular, bodily longing for a specific sound. The sound of a seabird is a sound that belongs to the edge of two worlds. Not the land and not the sea, but the place where they meet. The seabird lives at the margin, the threshold, the place of both. And Njörðr, who was himself a being of the edge, of the place where the divine met the mortal, where the sea met the shore, missed this sound the way you miss the sound of your own name in your own language when you have been too long away from home. In Rimheimer, there were no seabirds. Only the wolves and the wind and the specific quality of a silence he could not make his own. Skaði went to Nóatún, and what she said about it, the old sources preserve her side too, was that the sound kept her awake. The waves, the constant movement of the water, the creak of the boats, the cry of the birds that Njörðr loved. She could not find the stillness she needed. In Rimheimer, the silence was a living thing, present and real and deep. It held you in the way that the mountains hold you, not warmly, not with softness, but with a kind of impartial, immovable presence that was its own form of peace. The peace of the high places. The peace of things that have simply been, without change, for so long that change itself seems like a distant rumor. Nóatún could not give her this. The sea moved. The sea was always moving, always making its sounds. The water under the dock, the wind in the rigging, the birds overhead, all of it real and present and generous. And none of it what she needed. The parting between Njörðr and Skaði is one of the quietest and most dignified moments in Norse mythology. Not a conflict, not a failure, a recognition. Two beings who had tried, honestly and with genuine goodwill, to inhabit each other's worlds. And who found, at the end of the trying, that what they were made of was simply different. Not better or worse. Not one more deserving of love or more worthy of continuation. Simply different in the way that the sea and the mountain are different. Both necessary. Both complete in themselves. Neither one wrong. They parted with the specific mutual respect of two beings who have seen each other clearly and have found that what they have seen is genuinely admirable even as it is fundamentally unlike what they are. Skaði went back to her mountains. She is remembered there with her skis and her bow, hunting in the high cold places, entirely at home in the world that was hers. Njörðr went back to Nóatún, to the harbor and the boats and the sound of the seabirds, to the specific quality of the morning when the mist was still on the water and the first boats were going out. The story of Njörðr and Skaði is sometimes told as a sad story. And there is something of sadness in it, the genuine sadness of two beings who wanted something to work and found that it did not. But there is more in it than sadness. There is the specific dignity of having tried, of having moved from your own world into someone else's and tried, with genuine effort, to see it through their eyes. Njörðr went to the mountains. He found them beautiful. He missed the sea. Both of these things were true at once. And both of them made him richer than he had been before the trying. Because the person who has been to the mountains, who has felt the cold of the high places and heard the silence and seen the light above the clouds, is not the same person who has only known the sea. Even when they come home to the sea with relief and love and the specific gladness of return, they carry the mountains in them. Not as a longing, as a knowledge, the knowledge of what the other world is. And Skaði, returning to her mountains, carried the sea, the specific sound of the water at Nóatún, the smell of the salt air, the quality of the light on the water in the long evenings. She carried it not as what she preferred but as what she knew, the world made larger by the encounter with its opposite. In Midgard, along the long irregular coastlines of the Norse lands, the relationship between land and sea was everything. The fjords cut deep into the mountains. These were not merely geographical features. They were the marriage of the mountain and the sea. The specific beauty of the fjord was the beauty of two incompatible things meeting and finding, at the meeting, something neither could produce alone. The mountain coming down to the water reaching up into the mountain's heart. The specific quality of light in a fjord, the way the mountains on either side affected the angle of what came through, was a light that existed nowhere else. Warmer in some hours, more enclosed in others. The whole length of a fjord sheltered from the open sea's full force, the water calm when the water outside would not be calm. The Norse people sailed these fjords. They fished in them. They built their settlements on the strips of flat ground at the water's edge where the mountain relented enough to allow a house and a dock and a small field. And above them always the mountains, and below them always the water. Njörðr and Skaði, embodied in the landscape itself. The sea and the mountain, the generous harbor and the high cold silence. Both present, both necessary, both permanent parts of the world the Norse people lived in. Along the coastlines, in the places where the sea met the land in particular ways, the Norse people left offerings for Njörðr. Not grand temples. The Norse sacred spaces were not built to demonstrate human power. They were found in places that already had the quality of what was being honored. A rock at the water's edge that had been worn smooth by 10,000 tides. A small promontory where the sea air came from 3 directions at once. A sheltered cove where the water was always calm regardless of what the open sea was doing. These places had what Njörðr had. The quality of the sea's generosity. The quality of the protected space. The quality of the threshold between worlds. Offerings were left here. Carved figures of boats, the boat being the object that embodied the relationship between the human world and the sea world. Fish, or the first portion of the catch. Ale, the golden drink that was itself a form of abundance given back. The fisherman who had a good day. The sailor who had returned safely from a long voyage. The merchant whose ship had arrived with the goods intact. They gave back to the place that held Njörðr's quality, a portion of what they had received. Not because the giving was a transaction. Not because they believed the god would give less next time if they did not give now. But because gratitude expressed itself this way. Because the relationship between the Norse people and the sea demanded this kind of acknowledgement. The sea had been generous. You noted the generosity. You said, I received this. I am not pretending I did not. I am here with a portion of what I was given, acknowledging the giving. This is how you maintain a relationship with something larger than yourself that has been good to you. The sea gave the Norse people something that the land could not give. Freedom. Not the abstract freedom of political philosophy. The specific, physical freedom of having roads that no one could close. The mountain pass could be blocked by snow or by enemies or by the collapse of a rock face. The forest path could be made impassable. The land route between two places could be controlled by whoever held the land in between. But the sea was open. No one owned the sea. No one could block the sea lanes in the way that land routes could be blocked. The Norse people understood this freedom in their bones. It was part of why they sailed. Not only for trade, though trade mattered. Not only for fish, though fish sustained them. But for the specific quality of being on the open water, where the horizon was unobstructed and no one could come up behind you through a narrow pass. Where the entire world was available to the one with a ship and the knowledge to sail it. Njörðr gave this. Not only the fish in the net and the wind in the sail. The freedom. The specific freedom of the open water. The knowledge that the sea was a road that went everywhere. That a skilled sailor was, by that skill, free in a way that few other people were free. The Norse merchants sailed routes that connected the northern world to the southern world. From the fjords of Norway to the rivers of Russia, following the water, always following the water, north to south, east to west, wherever the water led. They carried amber from the Baltic shores, furs from the northern forests, the iron work of Norse craftsmen, and they brought back silk, silver, spices, the goods of distant places. The specific quality of the Norse longship was part of how this was possible. The longship was shallow, drafted enough to be pulled up onto any beach, light enough to be carried overland between river systems, capable of crossing open ocean and of navigating the smallest river. A ship that could go anywhere the water went and many places it did not. This versatility was Njörðr's gift made physical. The ability to move through the world as the water moved. Finding the way between things. Not forcing. Not demanding that the world accommodate a fixed form. Taking the form that the passage required. The sea that Njörðr presided over was not always summer calm. The North Sea had its seasons like the land. Winter at sea was different from summer at sea in the way that winter on land was different from summer on land, but more dramatically, more suddenly, more completely. The sea could change faster than the land. A morning of calm could become an afternoon of difficulty. The Norse people who sailed knew this. They read the sky and the water and the wind with the attentiveness of people for whom getting it wrong was a real cost. They knew which cloud formations meant weather coming. They knew what the specific quality of the horizon meant at different times of year. They knew the rhythms of the sea in their specific home waters, which currents ran when, which winds were reliable in which seasons, where the hidden rocks lay and how the water moved over them in different conditions. This knowledge was Njörðr's knowledge transmitted. Not supernatural. Deep, accumulated, embodied, living knowledge. The kind that takes generations to accumulate and is transmitted through apprenticeship and story and the specific act of being in a boat with someone who knows more than you until you know it too. Njörðr was the keeper of this knowledge. Not in the sense of guarding it or controlling it. In the sense of being it. Being the understanding itself. So that when a Norse sailor called on him, they were calling on the tradition of understanding that had made it possible to sail at all. The sea that gave fish. The sea that gave passage. The sea that received the dead without comment or condition. The sea that held the routes between one world and another. This was the sea that Njörðr's blessing touched. The sea in its capacity to give. This is not the sea without danger. The Norse people were not naive about the sea. They knew what it cost when the sea took rather than gave. They had lost boats and fishermen and sailors and merchants to the sea's less generous aspects. But they understood something that perhaps only people who live close to something vast and powerful can understand. That the dangerous thing and the generous thing are the same thing. That the sea that can take is the same sea that gives. that the power to harm and the power to provide are not separate qualities distributed to different seas. They are the same quality. The sea is enormous, and enormousness includes both the capacity for abundance and the capacity for destruction. The Norse people's relationship with the sea was therefore not the naive relationship of those who had never seen the sea at its worst. It was the complex, hard-won relationship of those who had seen both, who had received both, and who had chosen, given both options, to maintain the relationship, to keep sailing, to keep fishing, to keep trusting that the balance of what the sea gave was worth what it sometimes asked. And Njörðr was the expression of that choice, the ongoing decision to maintain the relationship with the enormous, generous, dangerous thing. The Norse merchants who came home with their ships full were prosperous, not because they had taken more than was available, because they had applied the right knowledge in the right way, had chosen the right routes, had read the weather correctly, had maintained their ships with the care that the sea demanded, had maintained the relationships with the trading partners that made the exchange possible, had treated the people they met with the respect that the Norse code of hospitality required. Njörðr's prosperity was not the prosperity of luck. It was the prosperity of the applied relationship. The right knowledge applied with patience in the right conditions, producing what was available to be produced. The fisherman who was prosperous was not prosperous because the fish had been placed in front of them. They were prosperous because they had accumulated the knowledge to go where the fish were and to take them in the way that allowed them to take fish again next time. This is not mystical. This is the specific, practical wisdom of people who have been in a relationship with a natural system long enough to understand it from the inside. And Njörðr was the god of this understanding, not the god of magical abundance, the god of the abundance that comes from knowledge applied with care. There is nothing like the sight of a ship returning to harbor, nothing like it in the experience of those who have been waiting for it. The specific quality of the ship appearing at the harbor's entrance, a shape at first, then a form, then the recognizable profile of the ship that you know, is one of the most complete emotional experiences that the Norse world offered. The waiting has been what it is. The days without news. The watching of the horizon. The learning to be with the not knowing in a way that does not destroy you. And then the shape. Small at first. Then larger. Then the specific ship, its sail and its profile distinctive. Then close enough to see the people on board. Then close enough to see faces. Then the specific face. The one you were waiting for. The harbor in those moments had the quality of Nóatún. The quality of Njörðr's hall. The quality of return. Complete. The voyage done. The person home. The specific relief, the specific embodied total relief of the return. Njörðr presided over this moment as much as over any other. The safe return was not less of his work than the favorable wind. It was, perhaps, the most complete expression of his work. The whole cycle, the departure, the journey, the arrival, made whole by the coming home. The sea that the Norse people knew was not the Mediterranean of warmth and myth. It was the North Atlantic, the Norwegian Sea, the Baltic, the seas of cold water and gray skies and sudden changes and the specific quality of northern light on water. In winter, the sea off Norway could be dark and cold and the light barely reached the horizon before it was gone again. The winter nights at sea were long. The northern lights sometimes appeared above the water, the same lights that appeared above the land, and they had a different quality above the sea. Above the land, the northern lights illuminated the trees and the snow and the specific things of the landscape. Above the sea, they illuminated only the water and the sky. And the water reflected them back, so that the lights were above you and below you simultaneously. The specific quality of the sea surface in that light, not quite mirror, not quite light source itself, but something in between, was unlike anything else. The sailor who saw the northern lights above the northern sea was in a visual world that had no solid reference points. The lights above. The lights reflected below. The ship in the center. a small point of warmth and human presence in the middle of a universe of light. This was the sea that Njörðr was the god of. Not only the generous summer sea. This too. The winter sea under the northern lights. The sea at its most immense. At its most beautiful. The old sources place Njörðr at the end of the age in a specific way. Unlike the Asgard gods who fall in Ragnarok's great final conflict, Njörðr's role at the end is different. After the great battle, after Ragnarok has completed what it was going to complete, the sources suggest that Njörðr returns to Vanaheim. Not falls. Returns. The Vanir, who came from an older tradition than the Asir, go back to what they came from. Njörðr goes home to Vanaheim. This is, in the Norse understanding, a completion, not a tragedy. The god who was sent from Vanaheim to Asgard as part of the Great Exchange, who lived among the Asir and gave them the sea's gifts and the wind's knowledge, returns, at the end, to where he came from. The circle is closed. The exchange completed on both ends. What was given is received. What was received is given back. The sea is like this. The tide goes out. The tide comes back. The cycle is the thing, not the direction of any individual movement. The cycle. And past the ending, in the new world that the Norse stories place after Ragnarok, the green earth rising from the water, the renewed beginning, there is a shore. There is always a shore. Because a world without a shore would be a world without the boundary between land and sea, and without that boundary, neither could fully be what it was. The shore in the new world will have what the shore has always had. The sound of the waves at the edge. The smell of salt and seaweed. The specific quality of the light on the water in the morning. The seabirds. Njörðr's seabirds. Crying in the air above the edge where the two worlds meet. The new world will need what the old world needed. A god who understands the sea. A god who can send the favorable wind and calm the waters and fill the nets. A god who can receive the prayers of sailors with the patient, practical wisdom of the one who knows the sea from inside. And Njörðr, who returns to Vanaheim, carries that understanding with him, ready to give it again when the new world is ready to receive it. As the tide carries what it carries, always, in the endless cycle of the thing. In all the seasons, the shore was beautiful. In spring, the sea ice that had formed in the coldest months began to break. The sound of it, the specific sound of sea ice cracking and grinding and releasing, was one of the most dramatic sounds in the Norse world. The ice gave way, and the water under it, which had been there through all the cold months, pressed up and found its freedom again. The first boats of the season were launched into water that was still cold enough to make your hands hurt, but free, open, moving in the specific way that moving water moves when it is not constrained by ice. In summer, the shore was everything summer made it. The warm beach where the boats were pulled up. The children who ran in the shallow water at the edge. The specific warmth of the sun on the dark sand that had been cold all winter. The seabirds nesting in the cliffs. The smell of the summer sea. Different from the winter sea, warmer, more alive in the specific way of things that have been warmed. In autumn, the shore prepared for winter. The boats were pulled further up. The nets were checked and mended and stored. The last harvests of the sea were made and the stores were laid in. The quality of the autumn sea, the specific gray-blue of the North Atlantic in October, the way the swell was longer and slower than in summer, was its own beauty. Serious and deep. The beauty of a thing approaching its season of rest. In winter, the shore was not empty. It was held. The ice might come or it might not. But the water was there in whatever form the cold allowed. And the birds were there. And the light on the water, the low winter light that came at an angle and traveled great distances across the surface, was there. The winter shore had the beauty of the essential. Of things reduced to what they actually were. Tonight, along the Norse coastlines, along all the coastlines of all the places where the sea meets the land, his quality is present. In the sound of the water against the dock. In the smell of the salt air. in the quality of the light on the water at this hour, in the cry of the seabird somewhere in the dark above the harbor, in the specific quality of the returned sailor's sleep, the deep, heavy, complete sleep of someone who has been at sea and is now on land and has allowed their body to remember what solid ground feels like, in the fisherman's satisfaction at the day's catch, in the merchant's relief at the ship that came in safely, in the quiet of the harbor at night, when the boats are moored and the water moves gently under them and the whole scene has the quality of something that has been doing this for so long that doing this is simply what it is. Njörðr's quality is in all of this, not because he put it there tonight, but because it was always there. The sea was always generous. The harbor was always a sanctuary. The return was always the completion. He is the name for what was always there. The understanding of the sea's best quality. The knowledge that the vast, impersonal, generous thing was always, finally, generously disposed toward those who approached it with respect and attention. Tonight, Nóatún is what it always is. The harbor of the divine. The ship place. The hall at the water's edge with the sound of the sea coming in through the walls the way the smell comes in through the walls. Not a leak, not a deficiency in the construction, but the quality of a building that has been long enough near the sea that the sea has become part of it. The fire is at its evening level. The light from it is warm on the weathered wood of the walls. The water outside is doing what it does in the evening, making the small sounds of the harbor at rest. The boats moored at the dock. The water under them. The specific creak of wood against water that is one of the most peaceful sounds in the world. The seabirds have settled for the night. They have found their rocks and their cliff ledges and they are doing what birds do at night. Resting in the specific light way of birds who can be airborne in a second, who sleep with one eye open to the quality of the world around them. The northern lights have begun above the water. Not dramatically. In the way they begin when everything else is quiet and you have been still long enough to see the subtle things. A pale green at the northern edge of the sky, reflected in the water below. Above and below at once. The harbor in the middle. The hall with its fire. The god in his hall. Watching. Patient. Generous. Present. The sea has been doing what it does since before any story was told about it. It has received every river that came to it. Every rain that fell into it. Every ship that sailed on it. Every sailor's prayer that went out across it. Every prayer answered and every prayer that was answered differently from what was asked. Every death and every return. Every tide and every calm. And it continues. The sea does not keep score. It does not remember the ships it has taken and hold that against the ships that come to it now. It is simply what it is. Every morning. Every tide. Every season. What it always was. First. Patient. Generous, dangerous, beautiful, ancient. Njörðr is the specific understanding of this. The knowledge of the sea that allows the sea to be approached and known. The specific, practical, living knowledge of the thing that gives and receives and gives again without keeping track. He is in the harbor tonight, and the harbor is in you. The specific quality of the harbor, the shelter, the return, the deep water that holds the boat safely. This is a quality you carry. You have arrived somewhere tonight. You have come in from whatever sea you have been crossing. The dock is beneath you. The fire is warm. The sound of the water is outside. Present. Steady. Speaking its own language. And you can simply rest. The voyage is done for tonight. The harbor has you. The sea is outside doing what the sea does. And Njörðr is in the quality of the harbor that holds you. In the warmth of the fire. In the sound of the water. In the cry of the seabirds that you can hear, even in the dark, somewhere above the harbor. Telling you what they always tell you. The sea is here. You are home.